Let's sit in a comfortable meditation posture. Close the eyes. Put the attention on the silence that is always there deep in the mind. This is the silent witness. You are the silent witness. Now listen to the words of the Yoga Vasishta from the perspective of the silent witness. Book 4, Chapter 62, verse 15. Only through patience does one redeem his good sense. Only by patient effort may one advance to a higher birth from his low and mean condition. The good have obtained births in life because of their good understanding. Therefore, O Ram, employ yourself polishing your understanding. A God-fearing man is possessed of every good and exerts his efforts to attain godliness. Only by manly efforts do men obtain the most precious blessing. Those of the best kind on earth long for their liberation in future, which also requires the exertion of tapas and meditation for its attainment. There is nothing on this earth or below it or in the heaven of the celestials above, which is unattainable to a concerned man through his self-efforts. It is impossible for you to obtain the object of your desire without the exercise of your patience and dispassion. Through the exertion of your prowess and austerities of celibacy, nor is it possible to succeed in anything without the right use of reason. Try to know yourself and do good to all creatures by your courage. Employ your good understandings to drive away all your cares and sorrows. In this way, you will be liberated from all pain and sorrow. O Ram, who is filled with all admirable qualities and endued with the high powers of reason, keep yourself steady in acts of goodness, and never may the false cares of this world overtake you in your future life. Book 5, on dissolution, becoming quiet. Chapter 1, the midday ritual. Vasishta said, "Now hear me propose to you the subject of quietude or rest, which follows that of existence and sustenance of the universe. This knowledge will lead you to nirvana, final extinction." Valmiki says, as Vasishta was delivering his holy words, the assembly of the princes remained as still as the stars in the clear sky of an autumn night. listening princes looking with muted gaze at the venerable sage amidst the assembly resembled the unmoving lotuses looking at the bright sun from their breathless beds. Harem princesses forgot their joy at hearing the sermon of the sage. Their minds became as cool and quiet as the long absence of their consorts. Ladies fanning with fans in their hands remained as still as a flock of flapping geese resting on a lotus bed. And the jingling of gems and jewels on their arms ceased like the chirping of birds on the trees at the princes who heard these doctrines sat reflecting on their hidden meanings, their index fingers on the tips of their noses in thoughtfulness. Others pondered on their deep sense of laying fingers on their lips. Ram's face flushed like the blushing lotus in the morning. It brightened by casting away its melancholy, as the sun shines by dispelling the darkness of night. King of Kings, Dasarata, felt as delighted hearing the lectures of Vasishta as a peacock is gladdened by the roar of rain clouds. Sarana, the king's minister, removed his unstable monkey mind from his state affairs and applied it intensely to attend to the teachings of the sage. Lakshman, who was well versed in all learning, shone as a digit of the bright crescent moon with the internal light of Vasishta's instructions and the radiance of his spiritual knowledge. Satrugna, the subduer of his enemies, was so full of delight in his heart at the teaching of the sage that his face glowed with joy like the full moon with all her digits. The other good ministers, whose minds were absorbed in the cares of state affairs, were set at ease by the friendly admonitions of the sage. They glowed in their hearts like lotus buds, expanded by sunbeams. All the other chiefs and sages present in that assembly had the gem of their hearts cleansed by their impurity by Vasishta's preaching. Their mind glowed with fervor from his impressive speech. At this instant, the loud sound of conch shells arose, resembling the full swell of the sounding ocean and the deep and deepening roar of summer clouds. The conch sound filled the roof of the sky and announced the time of midday service. The loud uproar of the shells drowned out the sage's feeble voice, just as the high-sounding roar of clouds puts down the notes of the sweet cuckoo. The Muni stopped his breath and stopped speaking, because it is vain to speak when it is not heeded or heard. Hearing the midday shout, the stage stopped for a moment. After the noisy confusion was over, he addressed Ram and said, Ram, thus far I have delivered to you my daily lecture for this day. I will resume it next morning and tell you all that I have to say on the subject. It is ordained for the twice-born classes to attend to their religious duties at midday. The lecture does not require us to swerve from discharging our noonday services at this time. Rise, therefore, O fortunate Ram, and perform your sacred ablutions and divine services with which you are well acquainted, and give your alms and charities also, as they are ordained by law. Saying so, the sage rose from his seat with the king and his courtiers. He resembled the sun or moon rising from the eastern mountain, with their retinue of stars. Their rising made the whole assembly rise after them, like a gentle breeze moving a bed of lotuses, with the black eyes of black bees sitting upon them. The assembled princes rose up with their crowned heads and marched with their long and massive arms, like a body of big elephants from the Vindhyan hills with their clumsy legs. As they pushed up and down in their hurry, the jewels on their bodies rubbed against each other and displayed with a blaze like that of reddened clouds at the setting sun. The jingling of gems on crowns resembled the humming of bees, and the flashing reflections from crowns spread various colors of the rainbow around. The beauties in the court hall, resembling tender vines and holding fans like clusters of blossoms in their leaf-like palms, formed a forest of beauties about the elephantine forms of the brave princes. The hall reflected the glints of blazing bracelets and looked as if it was strewn with the dust of mandara flowers blown away by the wind. There were crystal tanks of pure water, mixed with ice and powdered camphor. The landscape around was whitened by kusha grass and the flowers of autumn. Gems hanging from princess headdresses cast a reddish color over the hollow dome of the hall, making it appear like the evening twilight that precedes the shade of night, which puts an end to the daily works of men. The fair faces of fairy ladies were like lotuses, floating on the watery luster of the strings of pearls hanging upon them. They resembled lines of bees fluttering about lotuses. The anklets at their feet emitted a ringing sound like the humming of bees. A large assemblage of princes arose amid the assembled crowds of men and presented a scene never seen before by the admiring people. The rulers of the earth bowed down lowly before their sovereign and departed from his presence and the royal palace in large bodies, like waves of the sea, listening like rainbows from the light of their shining ornament. The chief minister Sumatra and others who were best acquainted with royal etiquette prostrated themselves before their king and the holy sage. Then took their way toward the holy streams to perform their sacred ablutions. The rishis Vamadeva, Vishwamitra, and others stood in the presence of Vashishta and waited for his leave to make their departure. King Dasaratha honored the sages one by one and then left them to attend to his own business. Citizens returned to the city and foresters retired to their forests. The aerial beings flew in the air and all went to their respective homes in anticipation of rejoining the assembly in the next morning. The Venerable Vishwamitra, being invited by the king and Vashishta, stayed and passed the night at Vashishta's home. Vashishta was honored by all the princes, sages, and great Brahmins, and adored by Ram and all of the princes of King Dasaratha's royal family. Then Vashishta proceeded to his hermitage, with the obeisance of the assembled crowds on all sides. And followed by a large retinue, just as the god Brahma is accompanied by bodies of celestial. He then gave leave to Rama and his brother princes, and to all his companions and followers, to return to their homes from his hermitage in the woods. He bade farewell to the aerial, earthly, and underground beings that kept him company with their formal praise of his merits. Then, entering his house, he performed his Brahmin rites with a dutiful disposition. Chapter 2. That night, Ram ponders Vashishta's lectures. Valmiki continued relating the story to Bharadwaja, saying, after the moon-bright princes returned to their residence, they performed their daily services according to the daily ritual. Vashishta and the other sages, saints, and Brahmins, even the king and princes, were all engaged in their holy services at their own houses. They bathed in sacred streams and fountains, and filled with floating lotuses and other aquatic plants. Their edges frequented by reddish geese, cranes, and storks. After they had performed their ablutions, they made donations of lands, cattle, seats and beddings, sesame grains, gold and gems, food and clothing to the holy Brahmins. Then in their own houses, they worshipped the gods Vishnu and Shiva in their temples and made offerings to the sun and the rulers of the skies, with offerings of gold and gems that are sacred to the particular gods and plants. After their offerings were over, they joined with their various sons and grandsons, friends and relatives, and their guests also, in partaking of their lawful food. Shortly after this, daylight faded away at the 8th watch of the day, and the charming city scene began to disappear from sight. People employed themselves with their proper duties at the end of the day and took to their evening service with the failing beams of the setting sun. They recited their evening hymn, repeated their japa mantras, and uttered their prayer for the forgiveness of sins. They read aloud their hymns and sang their evening songs of praise. Then rose the shade of night to allay the sorrow of love-lorn ladies as the moon arose from the milky ocean of the east to cool the heat of the setting sun. Then the princes of Raghu's race reclined on their downy and flowery beds, sprinkled with handfuls of camphor powder and appearing like a sheet of spreading moonlight. The eyes of all men were folded in sleep, and they passed the long night as if it were only a short interval. But Ram kept awake in his bed, meditating on all things he had heard from the sage. He continued to reflect on Vashishta's lectures, which appeared as charming to him like the cry of a parent elephant brings joy to its tender young. Now we continue established as the silent witness. and begin the Dreamana Sanyama process on the esoteric Mahamantra. And balance all the karmic traces that have been enlivened by today's reading. Jai Gurudev.